My name is Davis Borelli, and in this video essay, I'm going to look at the portrayal of gender through the lens of the horror genre. Women in particular may have a reason to keep coming back to the genre outside of a cheap thrill. In a study done by the Gina Davis Institute on Gender in Media and Google, using the Gina Davis Inclusion Quotient, or the GDIQ, it was determined that women are featured on screen and in speaking roles more than men only in the horror genre. With the advent of the MPAA rating system in the 30s, the kind of horror we know today didn't re-emerge until the 60s, making female characters who would later become known as final girls the vessel for traumatic experiences allowed viewers, especially men and boys coming home from war, to see someone reacting to trauma in the way that they wanted to but wasn't socially acceptable. Instead, the model for men to see themselves in was the macho, womanizing jock who goes outside to find the big bad, typically resulting in him being the first to die. While there was a lot of good in the survivors of these horror movies very commonly being female, a specific archetype of the female survivor made it clear what kind of girl it took to be the hero. The final girl being portrayed in 60s, 70s, and 80s slasher horror as an innocent virgin stereotype was no accident, what with America experiencing the breakdown of the nuclear family and Christian morals thanks to the free love movement of the 60s. This led to frequent themes of occultism, homosexuality, and hypersexuality in horror at the time. Characters who gave in to these evils were given a death sentence, as opposed to the final girls who were rewarded for their abstinence with survival. When films did stray from the norm by casting male leads in sequels in place of the final girl, a double standard emerged. Male protagonists were branded as homosexual for acting like the final girls before them, and the actors who portrayed them had their careers effectively ruined. Where the 70s gave rise to exploitation horror centered on violence against women, 80s niche horror had different scapegoats. Cannibal Holocaust, released at the beginning of the decade and directed by Ruggiero Deodato, tells the story of a group going to the Amazon in search of a missing film crew. They discover footage detailing the gruesome things the crew did to the tribe they encountered before they were killed. Not only is the portrayal of hostile tribes in the Amazon harmful to the actual tribes in the Amazon, but framing the main character of the film as a kind of white savior for not wanting the footage of the tribe distributed is basically rewarding him for the absolute bare minimum. The other standout film of the 80s, notorious for its subject matter, is that of Sleepaway Camp. Sleepaway Camp tells the story of a young girl who experiences the death of her family during a boating accident and is sent to live with her aunt and cousin. She and her cousin go to the summer camp, and it quickly becomes a bloodbath. The reveal at the end is that the young girl was the culprit because she wasn't a girl at all, but her twin brother, who was forced by the aunt to live as a girl. The narrative of trans people as dangerous, deranged villains pretending to be a different gender due to mental illness or against their will is deeply harmful to the LGBTQ people who were battling misconceptions at the time similar to this and still are. This energy evolved with the 90s, which shifted its focus to supernatural teenage hormones, with the likes of The Craft and many others. Looking at the villains of these movies, though, is a clear pointer to the ostracization of the weird kid in the 90s. This is most prominently seen in The Craft, where a girl with supernatural powers befriends a group of girls pretending to be witches. She bestows them with real powers, and hijinks ensue. The film culminates in the ringleader, who, out of the group, is the least conventionally attractive, being put in an insane asylum for her misdeeds, while the rest of the group gets off relatively scot-free. This served as an unfortunate continuation of the narrative that girls who were weird were to be punished, but if you were pretty, you could get away with it. With the 2000s filled with American-made J-horror and classic horror remakes, I'd like to skip forward, save for one movie. In the 2000s, a movie came out that caused a huge ruckus over how bad it was, but I think deserves a spot here for its portrayal of teenage girls in horror. Jennifer's Body, directed by Diablo Cody, starring Megan Fox and Amanda Seyfried, tells the story of Jennifer getting possessed after a botched human sacrifice because she lies about being a virgin. It was almost universally panned by critics, who called it a sexploitation film lacking the all-important ballast of sincerity. Both Cody and Fox, who were gaining fame for Juno and the Transformers franchise respectively, were already written off by critics, most of whom were men, before the movie had even been released. In reality, Jennifer's character was unique for being the mean girl who gets killed off, the big bad, and a revenge film-esque survivor all in one. And her best friend Needy was the sarcastic, dorky, sexually active final girl we never would have seen in classic horror. The last decade has given rise to a genre dubbed intelligent horror, ushering in an age with less mindless bloodlust and more nuanced characters and themes. Directors Jordan Peele and Ari Aster are arguably at the forefront of the intelligent horror genre. Peele's Get Out and Us giving people of color representation in a severely whitewashed genre. Get Out especially has received praise not just for the representation of people of color, but the very real, very prevalent issues of race and police brutality. One of the most important aspects is the depiction of the white savior character in the form of the protagonist's girlfriend, who is revealed to actually be a villain, showcasing the dramatization of the danger of performative activism and how that affects people of color. Ari Aster, on the other hand, deals with themes of mental illness and family trauma, something unfortunately somewhat universal. While mommy issues and cults are nothing new in horror, Ari Aster's work frames both subjects very differently, especially in regards to the women in his films. Midsommar heavily focuses on Dani, the protagonist's mental health and manipulation by others throughout the film as she navigates grief unapologetically and realistically. This portrayal of grief in Midsommar from a woman's point of view is so important because Dani is clingy, she's anxious, she's emotional, and she's human, as opposed to the polished, overdramatic depiction of women and their emotions that are so commonly seen in horror. Over the decades, horror and its portrayals of the human experience have shifted to continue being a compelling mirror for the issues of the time, but something that will always be current is that we can be scared.